You're listening to the Health Courage Collective podcast, episode 51, Calorie Casino. Hey there, do you have a great idea for a topic I should cover on the podcast? I would love to hear from you. Click the link in the show notes and tell me what you think I should talk about next. Welcome to the Health Courage Collective podcast, the show for women who are too busy to slog through hours of generalized, inapplicable, and often contradictory health information, but too smart to ignore that a few minutes of focused attention now can prevent years of suffering in the future. Your time is now. Let's go. Hello, and welcome to another episode. I'm so happy you're joining me today. Have you gotten a new outfit since our last episode together? Or maybe even more impactfully, have you gotten rid of an old outfit that doesn't fit your new self anymore? This week, we're going to talk about something super fascinating. Most of this comes from a book by Mark Schatzker, who my manly husband told me about. He heard him as a guest on the Art of Manliness podcast, and he told me about it because he knew what he was saying was right up my alley. He was right, of course. I listened to the Manly podcast episode and immediately went and got both of his books from the library. Most of this information comes from Mark's newer book, The End of Craving. He also has an earlier book called The Dorito Effect. If you find this episode interesting, I would highly recommend that you read or listen to his book. He's a journalist and a masterful storyteller. The book is very well written and makes way more important points than I'll be able to cover here today. Let's start by backing up to 3 background points to start with. One is about casinos or gambling. If you've watched The Social Dilemma, then good for you, and you know what makes gambling and casinos and slot machines and cell phones and social media apps so addictive is that they're unpredictable. It's been proven with humans and all different species of animals that unpredictableness is irresistible. Certainty, even with life or death items that you think you'd want to be certain about having, is boring. Uncertain cues are much more alluring. When the brain faces an uncertain situation, it ramps up motivation to strive for more. All different animals work harder under uncertain circumstances in order to avoid losses. And rationality goes out the window when you're under the spell of unpredictability. As Mark Schatzker explains, some scientists see uncertainty as a grand unifying theory of the brain. The brain is a master prediction engine. There are whole scholarly scientific journals, like more than one, on this subject, and extremely intelligent people spend entire careers studying uncertainty, gains, losses, and risk. When we're caught in its vortex, uncertainty doesn't feel uncertain. It doesn't plunge us into indecision. It excites us. It pulls us in. Second, I've heard it said in a lot of different places that foods these days are engineered to be hyperpalatable. I first read a book about it 12 or 15 years ago. All the manipulations we make to food to make them so delicious that we can't possibly resist them. Hyperpalatable. It's a catchy word and I've always assumed that it's true. Cheetos and Reese's peanut butter cups and grape soda seem hyperpalatable to me, especially compared to a celery stick or a piece of turkey. The third background point is that we often hear that dopamine is the addiction-driving neurotransmitter because pleasure comes from dopamine. I heard someone say it even just today. You buy something new, you get a little hit of dopamine. You eat a chocolate and you get a little hit of dopamine. Someone likes your Instagram post and you get a little hit of dopamine. Dopamine is the reward, the liking of something. When I first started listening to the End of Craving book, I was simultaneously listening to another book called Dopamine Nation by Anna Lembke. Not simultaneously, like at the exact same time, one in the left ear and one in the right. I'm all for efficiency. What if you could make that work? That would be so crazy. Anyway, you know what I mean. I was listening to both of them. And parts of them had quite a bit of overlap. They both talked about how by the 1970s, scientists had definitively proven that the pleasure chemical is dopamine. But both books explained how in the mid-1980s, that was proven to be wrong. What? If you want to hear more about dopamine in a future episode, click the link in the show notes and suggest it. It's pretty interesting. The ultra basic version is that what a researcher named Kent Berridge discovered in 1985 is that dopamine is the wanting chemical, not the liking chemical. Dopamine is more like a missile tracking system. It becomes aware of and goes after the target. If you rev up the dopamine system, the target becomes extra desirable. Turn dopamine down, and the world becomes drained of all enticement. Dopamine is motivation, incentive, excitement, desire, craving. It's not like wanting world peace or good health or for Johnny Depp's wife to not be a liar. Dopamine is craving. And the thing I found super interesting and didn't know before is that dopamine or wanting is not the same thing as liking. Liking is the moment of pleasure. Liking is the payoff or the enjoyment, the yes, this is good. Liking is not a dopamine thing. It has its own brain circuitry. It involves different neurotransmitters that trigger different opioid receptors. The like region and the want region talk to and influence each other, but they're separate. So you can deprive a brain of dopamine and it will not want. But if you force something good upon it, it will still like. If dopamine is cranked up, desire to eat rages out of control, even when overeating becomes unpleasant. I don't remember whether it was Schatzker's book or the Dopamine Nation book, but I kind of think it was Dopamine Nation. It talked about a study on different women, some healthy weight women who didn't want to change their body, and some overweight women who had a desire to lose weight. They put them in a functional MRI and showed them pictures. They showed them pictures of a chocolate milkshake, and the wanting area of the brain lit up much, much more in the overweight women's brains. Then they put a little bit of chocolate milkshake into their mouths, and the liking area of the brain lit up a little bit in all of them, but actually a little bit less in the overweight women. So the healthy weight women's wanting and liking matched pretty well, but the overweight women's wanting far exceeded their liking. When I heard that, I was like, well, that just sucks. You want to lose weight, not in the dopamine wanting sense, in the world peace wanting sense, but you have this crazy high want in the dopamine wanting sense, which is craving. But when you get what you've been craving, you don't even like it that much. How lame is that? When liking and wanting are uncoupled, weird things start to happen. Weird things like addiction. Kent Berridge, the guy who first figured out that wanting and liking are separate, spent his career figuring out addiction. Even he was sure that his addiction research had nothing to do with food. In 2009, he wrote an article dismissing the idea that obesity had anything in common with his research on addiction. In 2010, he changed his mind. The uncoupled wanting and liking circuits are the same in food addictions as in other substance addictions. An intense desire for something, even knowing that the thing you so desperately want may do you harm. Too much wanting and not enough liking is even a test that can be given to predict obesity. Too much wanting of food before you become obese is a good indication that you will eventually become obese. It's a cause of weight gain, not a consequence of it. The food and obesity problem isn't fueled by overindulgence in pleasure. In fact, the people who overeat might actually be rewarded with less pleasure from their meals. The problem is fueled by a desire to obtain pleasure, a dysfunction between brain circuits. Schatzker calls them raging bursts of desire followed by an underwhelming dribble of pleasure. What in the world is going on? Hey there, just a quick interruption to say I think the jury's still kind of out on how bad and in what way it's really bad to put aluminum on your skin, but it doesn't seem great, and I figured, why not avoid it? Well, because all of the aluminum-free deodorants I ever tried didn't work, until I tried Lume. This is the first aluminum-free deodorant I ever tried that actually worked. I was instantly converted. Then, over time, I discovered that the answer to my whole family's itchy skin after every shower problem is Lume's acidified body wash. It's awesome, and their acidified body butter keeps our skin soft and hydrated. They even have a laundry product that makes your clothes smell great. I can't say enough good about Lume. Plus, their commercials are hilarious. You should watch one on YouTube if you haven't seen one yet. If you want to give Lume a try, there's a link in the show notes that will give you $5 off your order. My favorite is the Pink Peony Body Wash. It smells like washing yourself with bubble gum, which I wouldn't recommend, but I do recommend Lume. Okay, back to the show. The book explains well an interesting experiment by a researcher named Dana Small. She created 5 separate drinks, each with a precise amount of the artificial sweetener sucralose, so that each drink tasted exactly as sweet as a drink that contains 75 calories of sugar. Most importantly, she added varying amounts of maltodextrin, a simple high-calorie starch that is completely tasteless. This allowed her to manipulate the calorie count of each drink while leaving the taste equal among all the drinks. So each drink tasted equally sweet, but each carried a different energy payload. 0, 37.5, 75, 112.5, or 150 calories. Small gave the sweet drinks to her test subjects and then scanned their brains as they sampled each beverage. If she detected any differences in the wanting areas of the brain, she knew it would have to be due to the calories and not the sweetness, because the drinks all tasted equally sweet. Schatzker writes in his book that it was ingenious. Dana Small had found a way to separate calories from sweetness in human test subjects, and now she would be able to measure which was doing what. Everything about the experiment was perfect except for one thing. It didn't turn out at all the way she expected. Small had anticipated that the highest calorie drink would trigger the biggest surge of blood flow in the dopamine highway. 150 calories are more biologically useful, after all, than 0, or 37.5 calories, and so forth. Yet it was the 75-calorie drink that generated the clearest spike of brain activity. What was going on? If calories were driving the desirability of the drinks, then the 75-calorie drink should have produced less motivational oomph than the 150-calorie drink. But it produced more. If calories had nothing to do with desirability, why would a 75-calorie drink be more desirable than a 0-calorie drink or a 150-calorie drink? What eventually came into focus was a single number, 75. The drinks had all been designed to taste as though they had 75 calories of sugar, and it was the 75-calorie drink that produced the biggest brain response. She then moved from the brain to the body and did an experiment measuring how each of the drinks was metabolized. The results blew her mind. The same people, on a different day, would indicate via indirect calorimeter that the 75-calorie drink would produce 75 calories of thermogenesis. But the 112 and 150-calorie drinks did not produce 112 or 150 calories of thermogenesis. When the calories and the sweetness didn't match, the calories were not properly used by the body. That sugar just floated around in the blood. She called the phenomenon nutritive mismatch. Sweetness isn't just a sensation, it's a metabolic signal. Continuing to quote Schatzker, when sweetness and calories match, it all hums along. Calories are burned, the brain registers it, and the brain remembers. But when there was an unexpected variance between what the tongue sensed and what the stomach received, the entire metabolic process seemed to shut down. It's like the system just threw up its hands, Smalls says, and didn't know what to do. Why were humans generally able to resist vastly over-consuming calories up until about 50 years ago? Dana Small gives us the beginning of an answer. Mark Schatzker says, ever since organisms began sensing food as it entered their body, the information gathered was reliable. This is why the ability to taste evolved in the first place. No creature has 40 minutes to sit and digest a meal so its brain can determine if it has had enough to eat. It is much more efficient to take a reading as the food comes in. The ability to sense food is so crucial, in fact, that more DNA is devoted to systems that sense the taste and flavor of food, the nose and the mouth, than any other part of the human body. Tasting food engages more gray matter than any other activity. The system is designed for accuracy, but it evolved in an environment in which food provided the senses with accurate information. Dana Small's research shows what happens when that changes, when the food we eat tells the brain a nutritional lie. The system fails. Calories enter the blood but are not burned. Nutritive mismatch. So interesting, right? Schatzker does a great job of explaining it more fully in his book, The End of Craving. A very basic part of food has been drastically altered in the last 50 years or so. It used to be that the taste of our food always matched the energy and macronutrients delivered by it. But in the last few decades, we've been able to significantly change the way our food tastes compared to the nutrition that it actually delivers to the body. We can make things with no calories taste sweet, and things with no fat taste rich and creamy. There's a whole industry of stabilizers, emulsifiers, and thickeners used to cut costs, increase shelf life, and improve mouthfeel without adding calories. There is a litany of fake fats that the food industry uses to change the texture of food without adding any calories. U.S. residents consume $500 million worth of fake fats every year without even knowing it. The food system is doing a very good job of keeping them all hush-hush. They're named things like Simpless, Methocel, Beta-Trim, Lycodex, and Carrageenan. But they're listed on packaging ingredient lists as milk protein, whey protein concentrate, or citrus fiber. Those sound healthy, but they're fake fats. They're there to trick your brain, and they succeed in the worst way. Sensory information used to be a reliable predictor of calories, but not anymore. Sweetness sometimes indicates sugar calories, but not always. Richness sometimes indicates fat calories, but not always. It's like a slot machine. As Schatzker puts it, when the relationship between calories and sweetness becomes sufficiently chaotic, you would expect the brain to infer the threat of a loss and respond accordingly. There are studies to show that people who use artificial sweeteners have more dopamine circuits in their brains. Their wanting is revved up. There are tons of studies on rats and gerbils showing that those who sometimes get real sugar but sometimes get fake sugar gain more weight. And rats who sometimes get real fat and sometimes get fake fat gain more weight. Their desire to eat is higher than in those whose food taste matches the calories it provides. Schatzker puts it eloquently when he says, "The brain is one of evolution's great masterworks, informed by an unfathomably complex network of sensors, nerves, hormones, and chemical messengers. The brain is a more intelligent eater than we are capable of comprehending. It achieves a level of nutritional precision that is stupefyingly exact. It can anticipate food shortages and can eat its way out of sickness. The brain, clearly, obviously, undeniably, is a metabolic genius. If you assembled the world's greatest minds and provided each with the world's fastest supercomputer, they collectively could not keep a running tally of all of our biological needs, let alone keep them perpetually in check. The brain does it effortlessly, 24 hours a day, every day of every week. And so, a question. If the brain senses change in the body and computes that action is required, how does it achieve its intended result? It is one thing to realize food is needed, but quite another to procure a meal and consume it. How does that brain translate all that information and computation into action? Hey there! I wanted to quickly interrupt and let you know that it's so much less of a struggle to consistently dominate your health choices when the thoughts you think naturally nudge you toward what you're trying to achieve. If you're looking to more consistently rock your healthy behaviors, I have a completely free 18-minute mini course for smart women like you who know that sometimes a quick mind flip can go a long way. Click the link in the show notes or go to healthcourage.ck/page/mini for this free mini course on 6 thoughts people who consistently rock their health choices think, and start putting one of them to good use inside your head today. Over the last several decades, the taste of food compared to what it delivered to our body went from highly certain to highly uncertain. Do you remember what uncertainty does for our brains? It's very captivating and it's extremely good at driving up wanting, dopamine circuitry. Here's another quote from Schatzker. Consider a few of the more noteworthy landmarks in the recent history of American food. The big gulp, supersizing, breaded chicken wings, the 20-ounce plastic Coke bottle, the Burger King triple stacker, stuffed crust pizza, KFC's Double Down, the 540-calorie ultra caramel frappuccino, Cinnabon's 1,080-calorie caramel pecan bun, Cold Stone's 1,740-calorie Reese's chocolate peanut butter dream milkshake, or the 2,590-calorie crispy honey chipotle chicken crispers and waffles at Chili's. Not a single one of those foods represent a cultural high point of sensory pleasure. These foods are about quantity. That's why they feature verbiage such as double, triple, ultra, super, and dream. They are the eating equivalent of loss chasing. No matter what any scientist tells you, these foods are not hyperpalatable. They do not represent the apex of eating pleasure. They just seem that way to people caught in the grip of wanting. What they are is hyper-craveable, end quote. I think that's such a good point. Hyper-craveable, not hyper-palatable. It's true, right? He describes in detail some of the true instances of the apex of eating pleasure. There is I forget what it's called, but something like the Sacred Brotherhood of the Tortellini in Italy, and some golden ravioli and other monuments to gelato and other what we would think of as unhealthy foods. There is a German researcher who treats obesity by having clients sit in a darkened room and let one of the most finely made chocolates slowly melt in their mouth. These artisan foods, lovingly made with the best quality ingredients, are the apex of eating pleasure. Not chicken and waffles from Chili's that I'm sure were frozen at a corporate plant and then thrown in the deep fryer when your waiter Bruce taps in your order while side-eyeing the game on the overhead TV. What would you say the most delightful food you ever ate is? What memories do you have of something so delicious that it seemed perfect? How much of it did you need to become enraptured by it? Probably not stuffed crust pizza or a Frito. Unless you're my 14-year-old, I wouldn't be surprised if he said something like that. A few years ago when Takis were the new thing, he thought they were so great and he had me try one and I was like, I think I detect an essence of cigarette butt here. They really tasted like Doritos that someone had been storing in an old ashtray or something. Not the apex of eating pleasure. Schatzker's other book, The Dorito Effect, is also really fascinating. I made my kids listen to it with me in the car as I was driving them all around, and now they know that even our most basic food ingredients are getting Doritoed. It's so crazy. But this nutritive mismatch theory is even crazier. It seems like gambling addicts can't stop gambling and food addicts can't stop eating because they're trying to gain money or food, but their intense subconscious desire is actually to attempt to avoid a loss. The drive to avoid a loss is mind-altering. Just the idea of a loss ramps up dopamine's effects to the point that it compels us to do irrational things. Casinos have become experts at turning that inborn trait against us. But, whether it knows it or not, so has the food industry. One of the things that can compel us to eat to the point of sickness is nutritive mismatch. We've divorced the usable nutrition in food from the taste so fully that uncertainty is now literally baked into everything we eat. Schatzker does a great job of explaining how a lot of the reason why we've altered food so much is because we think it was the problem in the first place. That food is bad and we're helpless slaves to the damage it inflicts. We thought we could fix food by reducing the calories or grams of sugar or fat, that we could use science to save ourselves from food. He says, quote, "Obesity is a sickness. People suffer because of it and they die because of it. But obesity is also a normal reaction to the changes we have inflicted upon food. Our attempts to, quote, improve food have achieved the opposite effect. By trying to fix what was never wrong in the first place, we have produced the perfect conditions for obesity. People don't eat because they are lazy, self-indulgent, or weak. They eat because they want to. They are tormented by a desire, a craving, a force that springs from the very core of their being, end quote. He also says, quote, "For so long, the cause of our disturbed eating has been invisible. That has made us cling, often religiously, to false and idiotic theories. The picture is at last becoming clear. The thing that changed, the event that energized wanting and created this artificial, inescapable hunger that has ensnared so many of us, is nutritive mismatch. For the first time in the history of our species, the information the brain senses about food has become consistently unreliable. The food environment is now something like a calorie casino. The problem is we are being goaded into a game we cannot resist, and it's killing us," end quote. What do you think about nutritive mismatch? Do you think the calorie casino theory is true? I do. I don't know that it's the end-all be-all singular answer to every problem in the world, especially Johnny Depp's ex-wife, but I do think that it plays a big part in what is messing with our brains. It's definitely made me think about what I eat, especially what I think of as healthy. Schatzker has successfully convinced me that my brain is a metabolic supersensor. The fake sugars and fake fat thing all makes sense to me, and I'm a little paranoid about it now, which I think is a good thing. But what about protein? Does my brain know that a sweet and creamy chocolate peanut butter shake equals 24 grams of protein, 2 grams of sugar, and 1 gram of fat? Does my body use it appropriately? How long does it take to learn? Is this a thousands of years of evolution thing? If it's less than that, maybe I'll be okay. I'm pretty consistent in my habits, except for when I sometimes sneak some of my husband's Fruity Pebbles protein powder. It tastes just like you're drinking the leftover milk from a bowl of Fruity Pebbles. That can't signal to my brain all protein and no carbs, can it? I don't know. What I see is that all of this is an argument for eating real food. Of course, I would have thought I was an advocate for eating real food in the past, but this makes it more clear to me. We all know that real food is better than Takis or Oreos or a Burger King triple stacker, but does it mean that ravioli made with full-fat ricotta is better than high-protein, low-sugar key lime yogurt? Based on the grams of carbs and number of calories, you wouldn't think so. But at least it's a nutritive match. It doesn't confuse your ultra-intelligent sensory system and trick your brain into a state of pathological loss chasing. It's something worth thinking about. I also think that it's important to consider the enjoyment you get from your food. Not the wanting, but the liking. Not the dopamine, but the endorphins. Eating truly, truly good food causes more enjoyment. The enjoyment of truly good food fuels the search for better food. Better, not more. I'll leave you with one last quote from the book, The End of Craving. Liking can be used as a tool against wanting. Now that we have an idea of how the system really works, we're finding the buttons that can change it. And the news seems almost too good to be true. The greatest malady presently affecting humankind may have the greatest of all possible treatments. Food so delicious as to be brain-altering. End quote. Thank you so much for being here today and learning about nutritive mismatch. Next week, we're going to talk about your call to adventure. Until then, eat food so delicious as to be brain-altering and don't be normal. Thank you so much for tuning into the Health Courage Collective podcast. I am truly honored that you have paid me the enormous compliment of your time and attention. I would be so grateful if you would share this podcast with someone you know and subscribe so you never miss an episode. This podcast is for entertainment and information purposes only. Statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Christina Hackett and producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse events by use of information contained herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.